The day I lost my job at Meridian Technologies was the day I discovered who my family really was. I'd been working there for nearly 6 years. My position as a senior software developer had been steady, with good benefits and a decent salary. Not spectacular by Silicon Valley standards, but enough to afford a modest apartment in Oakland and put some money away each month. I was 32 years old and had what I thought was a solid plan: work hard, save diligently, and eventually launch my own startup. Something innovative in the healthcare space, maybe. I had ideas, dreams. I'd always had them. The layoffs came, without warning, on a drizzly Tuesday morning in March. Our company had been acquired by a larger tech firm, and they were streamlining operations. That's corporate speak for cutting costs by eliminating redundant positions. My entire department was deemed redundant. I remember sitting across from Heather, my manager, who wouldn't meet my eyes as she slid the severance package across her desk. 2 months' pay, 6 years of my life, and that's what it amounted to. I fought for more, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This came down from corporate. I'm sorry, Alex. I nodded, numb. What else could I do? The walk back to my desk, past colleagues who were either packing up their own belongings or avoiding eye contact out of survivor's guilt, felt like a dream. I packed my things mechanically. The framed photo of my parents from my college graduation, the small cactus Sarah from accounting had given me for my birthday, the worn copy of Clean Code that had been my Bible for years. Outside, the rain had picked up. I stood under the building's awning, wondering what to do next. The logical part of my brain knew this wasn't catastrophic. I had skills, experience, a decent network. The job market in the Bay Area was competitive but vibrant. I had some savings, not a lot, but enough to cushion the blow for a while. I'd be fine, eventually, but the emotional part of me was in free fall. 6 years gone. My carefully constructed plans, suddenly uncertain. I called my mother. Patricia Levine answered on the third ring. Alex, is something wrong? You never call during work hours. My mother's voice, always slightly concerned, always slightly critical. She and my father had retired to Arizona 5 years ago, leaving behind the Massachusetts suburb where I grew up. They lived in one of those planned communities for the 55-plus crowd, with golf courses and community centers and organized activities to keep them busy. I lost my job, I said, my voice cracking slightly. The company was acquired. Mass layoffs. There was a pause. Oh, Alex, I'm so sorry. Her tone was sympathetic, but there was something else there too. Disappointment? Judgment? Your father and I were just talking about how unstable the tech industry is these days. Of course. My parents had never fully understood or approved of my career choice. My father had been a high school principal, my mother a nurse. Steady, respectable professions with pension plans and clear career trajectories. The volatile world of tech startups and software development might as well have been sorcery to them. Yeah, well, I shifted my box of belongings to my other arm. I've got some savings. I'll be fine. Of course you will, dear. You're smart. You'll land on your feet. Another pause. Have you called your brother? James, my older brother, the surgeon. The golden child who had followed a respectable path into medicine, married his college sweetheart, and now had 2 perfect children and a house in Connecticut. James, who had never taken a risk in his life. No, Mom. I just found out an hour ago. You're the first person I called. You should tell him. He might know someone who could help. I doubted James knew anyone in the tech industry who could help me, but I didn't say that. I'll call him later. We chatted for a few more minutes. She asked practical questions about my severance package and health insurance. She reminded me that I should start job hunting immediately. All sensible advice, delivered in that particular maternal tone that made me feel like I was 16 again, and had just failed my driver's test. By the time I hung up, I felt worse, not better. I called an Uber and went home. My apartment felt different in the middle of a workday. Too quiet, too empty. I set my box of office belongings on the kitchen counter and opened my laptop. Time to update my resume, reach out to contacts, set up job alerts. But first, I poured myself a drink, just one, just to take the edge off. That night, I called James. "Tough break," he said after I told him about the layoff. "But hey, you tech guys bounce around jobs all the time, right? Isn't that normal in your industry?" "Not exactly by choice, James." Right. He cleared his throat. "Well, I'm sure you'll find something. You're good at what you do." The conversation shifted to his life. His practice was thriving. His daughter had been accepted into a prestigious private elementary school. His son was showing promise in Little League. His wife had redecorated their living room. "Listen," I said eventually, "I might be a bit tight on cash for a while. My rent in Oakland is pretty steep, and while I have some savings, I don't know how long it'll take to find a new position." There was a pause. "What are you asking, Alex?" I hadn't been asking anything, not really. Just sharing my situation. But now that he mentioned it, I don't know, maybe a loan? Just until I get back on my feet. I'd pay you back with interest. Another pause, longer this time. "I don't think that's a good idea. Mixing family and money never ends well." "Right. Of course." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. It was just a thought. "Have you considered moving somewhere with a lower cost of living? Oakland is expensive. Maybe this is an opportunity to make a change." Easy for him to say from his 5-bedroom colonial in Connecticut. "I've built my network here, James. All my contacts are in the Bay Area." Just a suggestion. His tone was defensive now. "Look, I've got to go. Sophia has ballet tonight, and I promised I'd take her. Keep me posted. On the job hunt, okay?" "Sure thing." After hanging up, I sat in the dark of my apartment for a long time. Then I poured another drink. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into the job search. I updated my LinkedIn profile, reached out to former colleagues, attended networking events. I had several promising interviews, but nothing concrete materialized. The tech sector was experiencing a broader downturn, and companies were being cautious about new hires. My savings dwindled. I cut expenses wherever I could. No more takeout, no more streaming subscriptions. I even considered getting a roommate, but the thought of sharing my small apartment with a stranger was too depressing to contemplate. 2 months in, with my severance package exhausted and my savings dangerously low, I called my parents again. This conversation was harder than the first. I wasn't just sharing bad news now, I was asking for help. I laid out my situation as matter-of-factly as I could. I had enough money for maybe 1 more month of rent. My job prospects were promising, but not immediate. I just needed a bridge loan to get through this rough patch. My father got on the phone. William Levine had always been a man of few words, and today was no exception. "We're on a fixed income. Alex, we can't afford to bail you out." "I'm not asking for a bailout, Dad. Just a loan. I'll pay it back as soon as I'm working again." "And when will that be? You said yourself the market is tight right now." "I have interviews lined up. Something will come through." "Maybe," he conceded. "But maybe not. And then what? We send more money?" I felt a flash of anger. "I've never asked you for money before. Not once since I graduated college. And we're proud of that. You've always been independent. But son, this is why we always encouraged you to have a more stable career. The corporate world is cutthroat." "Dad, I'm not asking for a lecture on career choices. I'm asking for help, a temporary loan, from my family." There was a long silence. Then my mother's voice came on the line. "Alex, honey, we just don't have the liquid assets right now. Our money is tied up in investments, in the house. We can't just pull out cash." I knew this wasn't entirely true. My parents lived comfortably. They took cruises, they golfed, they had recently renovated their kitchen. They had money, They just didn't want to give it to me. Fine, I said, my voice tight. I understand. I'll figure something out. We know you will, my mother said, her voice overly bright. You've always been resourceful. After hanging up, I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crack, but unfortunately didn't break. I couldn't afford a new one anyway. I didn't call James again. I knew what his answer would be. Instead, I did what thousands of desperate people do every day. I started looking for side gigs. I signed up for food delivery services, looked into tutoring computer science, even considered driving for Uber, though my 10-year-old Honda might not qualify. It was while scrolling through yet another job board that I saw a posting that caught my eye. A startup called Health Quanta was looking for a full-stack developer with experience in healthcare applications. It wasn't exactly my background, but I had worked on a project involving electronic medical records at Meridian. Maybe that would be enough. I polished my resume, emphasizing that project, and wrote a cover letter explaining why I was passionate about healthcare technology. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did believe technology could revolutionize healthcare delivery. But mostly, I was passionate about making rent next month. To my surprise, I got a response the next day. They wanted a phone interview. The call went well. The technical questions were challenging but fair, and I was honest about my limited experience in healthcare apps specifically, while emphasizing my eagerness to learn. The interviewer, a woman named Maya Chen, seemed impressed by my candor. Most candidates try to oversell themselves, she said with a laugh. It's refreshing to talk to someone who's straightforward about their strengths and limitations. A week later, I was called in for an in-person interview at their office in San Francisco. It was a small operation, occupying half a floor in a converted warehouse in Soma. The space was typical startup chic: exposed brick, open floor plan, a few plants strategically placed to suggest a commitment to work-life balance. I met with Maya again, along with the CTO, a lanky man named David who asked probing technical questions, and the CEO, a charismatic woman named Eliza, who spoke passionately about the company's mission to make healthcare more accessible through technology. Our app helps patients navigate their insurance benefits, find providers, and understand their treatment options, she explained. We're especially focused on underserved communities who traditionally struggle with healthcare access. It was the kind of mission-driven work I had always hoped to do, the kind that made the volatility of startup life worthwhile. At the end of the interview, they asked about salary expectations. I gave a range that was slightly below what I'd been making at Meridian. I couldn't afford to be greedy. Eliza and David exchanged a glance. That's actually lower than we were budgeting for this role, Eliza said. We want to make sure we're compensating fairly for the expertise we're bringing in. I blinked, surprised. I'm flexible, I managed to say. Maya smiled. We'll be in touch soon. On the BART ride back to Oakland, I allowed myself to feel a flutter of hope. It seemed promising, but I had thought that about other interviews too, only to receive polite rejection emails days later. To my shock, they called the next morning with an offer. The salary was indeed higher than what I'd suggested, with decent benefits and, most intriguingly, stock options in the company. We're still in the early funding stages, Maya explained. But we just secured a Series A round, and the growth projections are strong. These options could be valuable down the line. I accepted on the spot. I couldn't afford not to. That weekend, I called my parents with the good news. They were appropriately pleased, though my father couldn't resist saying, "Let's hope this company has more staying power than the last one." I didn't mention how close I'd come to financial disaster. I didn't tell them that I had exactly $247 left in my checking account, or that I'd been researching homeless shelters just in case. They didn't ask, and I didn't volunteer the information. What mattered was that I had survived. No thanks to them. Part 2. The Climb. My first day at Health Quanta felt like stepping into an alternate universe, After months of unemployment and financial anxiety, suddenly I was part of something again. I had a desk, a company laptop, colleagues who smiled and welcomed me. I had purpose. The work was challenging from the start. Health Quanta's app was more complex than it appeared on the surface. It needed to interface with numerous insurance, databases, healthcare provider systems, and medical information resources, all while remaining user-friendly for people who might have limited tech literacy. I threw myself into the codebase, staying late to get up to speed, asking questions, making suggestions. I was determined to prove myself invaluable. I couldn't afford another layoff. Maya, who I now knew was the lead developer, became my mentor and friend. She was brilliantly technical, but also had a knack for explaining complex concepts simply, a rare combination. Over lunch one day, about 2 weeks in, she asked about my background. "I'm curious," she said, picking at her salad. "Your resume shows you were at Meridian for quite a while. What made you leave?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I was laid off. Company acquisition, department redundancies. You know how it goes." She nodded sympathetically. "That's rough. Were you unemployed long?" "A few months. Long enough to know I never want to go through that again." "Is that why you're working like you're trying to single-handedly ship our next release?" She smiled to soften the observation. "You're making the rest of us look bad." I laughed, a bit embarrassed. "Sorry, I just want to contribute." "And you are. But pace yourself. This is a marathon, not a sprint." She studied me for a moment. "You know, Eliza and David really fought to bring you on. They saw something in you during that interview. A hunger, yes, but also a vision. The way you talked about using technology to solve real human problems, that resonated. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the spicy noodles I was eating. This is the kind of work I've always wanted to do, making a difference, not just building another app to help rich people get their laundry done or food delivered slightly faster." Maya laughed. "Oh God, yes. The world doesn't need another convenience app. It needs solutions to actual problems." She leaned forward. "That's what drew me to Health Quanta too. My mother has chronic health issues, and I've seen firsthand how broken the healthcare system is. Technology can't fix all of it, but it can certainly help people navigate the mess." We bonded over that shared vision, and over the weeks that followed, we became a formidable team. Maya's architectural skills complemented my attention to detail and user experience focus. We developed a shorthand, finishing each other's sentences in meetings, building on each other's ideas. The company itself was growing rapidly. New hires joined every few weeks. The energy was electric, the kind of environment where ideas flowed freely and innovation was celebrated. Eliza, the CEO, was a master at fostering this culture. She held weekly all-hands meetings where anyone could pitch ideas or raise concerns. She knew everyone's name and something personal about them: favorite foods, pets, hobbies. 6 months in, I was promoted to lead a small team focused on developing new features for the app. It came with a salary bump and additional stock options. My financial situation, once so precarious, was now stable. I'd replenished my savings and even started contributing to my 401k again. I called my parents to share the news. "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said. "It sounds like things are really turning around." "They are," I agreed. "The company's growing fast. The app is getting attention from major healthcare providers. We might even partner with a couple of large hospital systems." "That all sounds very impressive," my father chimed in. "Though these startups can be volatile. Remember what happened at Meridian?" I bit back a retort. Some things never changed. "We just closed a Series B funding round. We're well capitalized." "That's good to hear." He paused. "Your brother's practice is expanding too. He's bringing in a new partner next month." And there it was. No conversation with my parents was complete without an update on James's successes. "Great," I said flatly. "Tell him congratulations from me." I changed the subject, asking about their plans for the holidays, and we concluded the call amicably enough. But as I hung up, I felt that familiar twinge of being the lesser child, the one whose achievements were always qualified with concerns, while James's accomplishments were celebrated unreservedly. I pushed the feeling aside. I had work to do, a team to lead, a vision to fulfill. My parents' approval or lack thereof shouldn't matter anymore. I was 33 years old, for God's sake. The next year was a whirlwind. Health Quanta grew from 30 employees to over 100. We moved to larger offices in downtown San Francisco. Our user base expanded exponentially, especially after we secured partnerships with 3 major hospital systems and several large employers who offered our app as part of their benefits package. My role grew with the company. I was now director of product development, overseeing multiple teams. Maya had been promoted to CTO after David left to start his own venture. We still collaborated closely, still shared that original vision of using technology to solve real problems in healthcare. And somewhere along the way, our professional relationship evolved into something more personal. It started with late nights, working together, order and dinners at the office, conversations that drifted from code architecture to books, movies, life philosophies. Maya was brilliant, kind, passionate about her work, but also balanced in a way I admired. She rock climbed on weekends, volunteered at a coding boot camp for underserved youth, maintained close friendships outside of work. Our first date, when we finally acknowledged the chemistry between us, was at a small Korean restaurant in the Mission. Over bibimbap and soju, we talked about everything except work. I learned that she had grown up in Michigan, the daughter of Chinese immigrants who ran a restaurant, that she had been coding since she was 12, when a teacher recognized her aptitude for mathematics and suggested a computer science summer camp, that she loved dystopian fiction and hated cilantro. "It tastes like soap," she insisted, picking the offending herb out of her dish. "It's genetic, you know. Some people have a receptor that makes cilantro taste like cleaning products. So you're genetically predisposed to be picky about food," I teased. She threw a napkin at me. Says the man who just asked for his kimchi on the side. We laughed, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Happiness. Not just relief at having survived a crisis, not just satisfaction from work, but genuine joy. Our relationship progressed naturally from there. We were cautious at first, aware of the complications of dating a colleague, especially given our positions in the company. We disclosed the relationship to HR and Eliza, who was supportive but established clear guidelines to prevent conflicts of interest. 6 months after that first date, Maya moved into my apartment in Oakland. It was a tight fit, her collection of climbing gear and programming books taking up what little free space I had, but we made it work. We talked about looking for a larger place eventually, maybe even buying something together if the company continued its upward trajectory. Health Quanta was indeed thriving. Our Series C funding round made headlines in the tech press. We were featured in articles about innovative healthcare solutions. Eliza was named to Forbes' 30 Under 30 list. The valuation of the company soared, and with it, the theoretical value of our stock options. I was no longer living paycheck to paycheck. I had substantial savings, investments, and the promise of potentially life-changing wealth if the company continued its growth trajectory. It was surreal to think about, given where I'd been just 2 years earlier. One evening, as Maya and I were cooking dinner together in our small kitchen, my phone rang. It was my brother James, which was unusual. We typically communicated via obligatory holiday texts and occasional emails, not spontaneous phone calls. "Alex," he said, his voice unusually warm. "How are you? It's been too long." "I'm good," I said cautiously. "Busy with work. You?" Same. The practice is doing well. He paused. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. I've been following your company. Health Quanta, right? Mom mentioned you're doing some innovative things in healthcare tech. My suspicion grew. James had never shown interest in my work before. Yeah, that's right. We're trying to make healthcare more accessible, more understandable for patients. That's fantastic. Really important work. Another pause. Look, I'm going to be in San Francisco next month for a medical conference. I'd love to get together. Maybe see your office, hear more about what you're doing. Sure, I said, still puzzled by this sudden interest. We could grab dinner or something. Great. And, I was thinking... His voice took on a casual tone that sounded rehearsed. I've been looking to diversify my investment portfolio, moving some money from traditional stocks into promising startups. If there's any opportunity to invest in Health Quanta, I'd be very interested. And there it was. James wasn't calling to reconnect or express genuine interest in my work. He wanted to capitalize on my success. We're not publicly traded, I said coldly. Investment opportunities are limited to venture capital firms and strategic partners at this stage. Right, of course. But sometimes there are private placement options, friends and family rounds. I'd be open to something like that. I felt Maya's hand on my back, a silent question. I shook my head slightly. I'll ask our finance team if there's anything available, I lied. But it's unlikely. Well, keep me posted. His voice remained upbeat. And regardless, I'd love to catch up when I'm in town. It's been too long, brother. After I hung up, I relayed the conversation to Maya, who raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. This brother wasn't interested in investing in your future when you were unemployed and asking for help? Got it in one. I stirred the pasta sauce with more force than necessary. He explicitly refused to loan me money when I needed it. Said mixing family and money was a bad idea. But now that there's potential for substantial returns, those principles have conveniently evolved. Exactly. I tasted the sauce, added more basil. The irony is, if he had helped me then, I might not have ended up at Health Quanta at all. I might have held out for a safer, more corporate position instead of taking a chance on a startup. Maya wrapped her arms around me from behind. His loss, in multiple ways. I leaned back into her embrace, grateful for her understanding, for her presence in my life. I don't even know if I want to see him when he's here. What would be the point? That's up to you. But don't let his opportunism taint what you've accomplished. You've built something valuable, Alex. Something that's helping people. That's what matters. She was right, of course. But the call from James had reopened old wounds, and it was just the beginning. The next week, my parents called. This was slightly less unusual. We had settled into a pattern of monthly check-in. Calls, but the timing, so soon after James's call, made me instantly wary. Alex, darling, my mother began after the usual pleasantries. Your father and I have been thinking about our retirement planning. We've been very conservative with our investments, mostly bonds and index funds. But James suggested we should diversify a bit, maybe consider some more growth-oriented opportunities. I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was heading. He mentioned your company is doing very well, that it's one of these, what do they call them, unicorns? We're not a unicorn, Mom. Not yet, anyway. The term was reserved for startups valued at over $1 billion. Health Quanta was on that trajectory but hadn't quite reached that valuation. And we're not publicly traded. You can't just buy shares. Yes, James explained that. But he said, sometimes these companies offer private investment opportunities. For family. The audacity was breathtaking. After refusing to help me during my darkest hour, they now wanted to profit from my success. I thought of those desperate phone calls, my father's dismissive tone, my mother's excuses about fixed incomes and liquid assets. There are no family investment opportunities, I said, my voice tightly controlled. The company takes investment from professional venture capital firms, people who understand the risks and have millions to invest. Oh, she sounded disappointed. Well, if that changes, will you let us know? We've been thinking it might be nice to have a slightly more comfortable retirement. Maybe take a few more trips while we still can. I thought of all the cruises they'd been on, the golf club memberships, the kitchen renovation. They had been comfortable enough when I needed help. Sure, Mom, I'll let you know. Another lie. Hey, I've got to run. Meeting in 5 minutes. A third lie. Of course, honey. We're so proud of you, you know. You've really made something of yourself. Now, finally, they were proud. Now that there was potential profit in it. As I hung up, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger, vindication, a petty satisfaction at being able to reject their overtures as they had rejected mine. But mostly, I felt sad. Sad that our relationship had been reduced to this transactional dynamic. Sad that their interest in my life seemed contingent on what I could do for them, rather than genuine care for my well-being. Maya found me sitting in the dark of our living room, staring out the window at the Oakland skyline. Parents this time? She asked, settling beside me on the couch. I nodded. Same story. Suddenly very interested in diversifying their retirement portfolio with some Health Quanta stock. She took my hand. Are you okay? I don't know. I turned to look at her. Is it wrong that part of me wants to rub their noses in it? To say, remember when I was down and out, and you couldn't spare a dime? Well, look at me now. She considered this. I don't think it's wrong to feel that way. It's human. But I also don't think it would make you feel better in the long run. Resentment is a poison you drink yourself. When did you get so wise? I pulled her closer. Oh, I've always been wise. It's why you're lucky to have me. She kissed my forehead. For what it's worth, I think the best revenge is living well. Build this company, make it successful because it's important work that helps people, not to prove anything to your family. Their narrow-mindedness is their loss. Again, she was right. I resolved to put my family's sudden interest in my financial prospects out of mind and focus on what mattered: the work, the vision, the difference we were making. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. Part 3. The Summit. 3 weeks. After my brother's call, Health Quanta received extraordinary news. A major health insurance company was interested in acquiring us. The offer was substantial, far beyond our most optimistic projections. Eliza called an emergency all-hands meeting. The atmosphere was electric as she stood before the assembled staff. I know there's been speculation about why I called this meeting, she began. And yes, the rumors are true. Anthem Health has made an offer to acquire Health Quanta. A murmur ran through the crowd. The proposed deal values our company at $1.2 billion. The murmur became a roar. People gasped, cheered, hugged each other. We'd done it. We were officially a unicorn. This is a testament to the incredible work all of you have done, Eliza continued once the noise died down. You've built a product that's truly changing how people interact with the healthcare system. Anthem recognizes that value. She went on to explain the terms of the proposed acquisition. Anthem would keep our team intact. We would operate as a subsidiary with significant autonomy. Our app would be integrated into their offerings, but would also remain available as a standalone product. And yes, she said with a smile, your stock options will be converted at the acquisition price. The details will vary based on your individual equity packages, but HR will be setting up meetings with each of you to go over what this means for you personally. More cheers. For many in the room, including myself, this meant life-changing money. The stock options that had been theoretical paper wealth would become actual cash. After the meeting, Maya and I retreated to her office, closing the door behind us. We looked at each other in disbelief. "Is this really happening?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Looks like it. Subject to due diligence and regulatory approval, but yeah, this is happening." We'd both joined Health Quanta early enough to have accumulated significant equity. If the acquisition went through as proposed, we were looking at millions. Each. "What would you do?" I asked. "If this goes through? If suddenly you had $7 million, she finished, having clearly already done the math. "Give or take." She leaned back in her chair, considering. "I'd help my parents retire. They've been running that restaurant for 30 years. They deserve to rest." She looked at me. "What about you?" I hadn't thought that far yet. The numbers were still abstract, unreal. "I don't know. Maybe buy a house? Something with enough space for your climbing gear and my pathetic excuse for a home gym." She smiled. "And after that? Would you stay with the company? Start something new?" It was a good question. I'd been so focused on building Health Quanta, on proving myself, on financial stability, that I hadn't thought much beyond that. I think I'd want to stay, at least for a while. Make sure our vision doesn't get lost in the acquisition. What about you? Same, she agreed. We've built something important here. I wouldn't want to walk away until I'm confident it will continue to help people, not just Anthem's bottom line. We spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of our regular work, but frequently interrupted by colleagues wanting to speculate about the acquisition, to celebrate, to dream about what they'd do with their newfound wealth. That evening, as we walked to the BART station to head home, my phone rang. It was James again. I showed Maya the caller ID and rolled my eyes. "Want to bet what this is about?" "No bet," she said. "You going to answer?" I hesitated, then decided I might as well get it over with. "Hello, James." "Alex, great news about the acquisition. Congratulations." I stopped walking, Maya halting beside me. "How do you know about that?" "It was just announced internally today." The information wasn't public yet, though it would be soon enough once the regulatory filings began. "Oh." James sounded momentarily flustered. "I have a colleague who knows someone at Anthem. Word gets around in healthcare circles. But listen, this is huge for you. Really happy for you, brother." I doubted that. "Thanks. It's exciting for the whole team." "Absolutely. Listen, about my visit next month. I'm really looking forward to it. Maybe we could discuss potential opportunities. Now that the acquisition is happening, there might be new investment possibilities, pre-IPO shares, that sort of thing." Maya was watching my face, her expression concerned. I closed my eyes briefly, collecting myself. "James, there won't be an IPO. We're being acquired. And even if there were investment opportunities, I wouldn't be inclined to involve family." "What? Why not?" He sounded genuinely confused. "Because when I needed help, when I was facing potential homelessness, you said mixing family and money was a bad idea. Remember that conversation?" There was a pause. "That was different, Alex. That was a personal loan, not a business investment. From my perspective, it was family not being there when it mattered. And now that things are good, suddenly everyone wants a piece." "That's not fair. I was in a different position then. Sophie was starting private school. We'd just renovated. The house—" I cut him off. "And I was about to be evicted. But you had priorities, I get it. Now I have mine." "You're being petty," he said, his tone hardening. "This is business, not personal. It's always personal with family, James. You taught me that." I took a deep breath. "I've got to go. If you still want to get dinner when you're in town, let me know. But there won't be any investment opportunities to discuss." I hung up before he could respond. Maya took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You okay?" "Yeah." And surprisingly, I was. Standing up to James had been oddly liberating. Let's go home. My phone buzzed with a text as we entered the BART station. I expected it to be from James, but it was from my mother. Your father and I just heard the wonderful news from James. So proud of you, honey. Can we talk tomorrow about some retirement planning ideas we have? I showed the message to Maya, who shook her head in disbelief. The coordination is impressive, at least. They're like vultures circling, I muttered, pocketing my phone without responding. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Due diligence teams from Anthem descended on our offices, reviewing our code, our contracts, our financials. Legal teams negotiated final terms. PR teams prepared announcements. Through it all, our regular work continued. We had users who depended on our app, features in development, bugs to fix. Maya and I barely had time to process the personal implications of the acquisition. We'd have those meetings with HR eventually to understand exactly what our equity would be worth. But for now, we were focused on ensuring the transition went smoothly. We both cared too much about what we'd built to let it falter now. My parents continued their campaign, calling and texting regularly with thinly veiled inquiries about investment opportunities. I gave them the same answer each time. There were none. Eventually, they shifted tactics. We're thinking of moving back to California, my mother announced during one call. We miss the weather, and it would be lovely to be closer to you. I doubted weather and proximity to me were the real motivations. California's expensive, Mom, much more than Arizona. Oh, we know, dear, but we've been thinking, with your new position, maybe you could help us a bit. Just with the down payment on a modest place. You'll be coming into quite a bit of money, from what James tells us. I nearly laughed at the audacity. So now you want me to buy you a house in California? Not buy, just help with a down payment. It would be an investment for you, too. California real estate always appreciates. I thought of those desperate calls 2 years ago, my father's dismissive, we're on a fixed income excuse. I'll think about it, I said, not committing to anything. But I had already decided. I would not be helping them buy a house. I wouldn't be offering them investment opportunities. I wouldn't be bankrolling their retirement. Not after they'd left me to drown. Was it petty? Perhaps. But it was also self-preservation. I couldn't trust them to be in my life for any reason other than financial gain. And I refused to be used that way. The acquisition moved forward. The deal was announced publicly, to much fanfare in the tech and healthcare press. Health Quanta was officially a success story, a unicorn, a game-changer in healthcare technology. Eliza was interviewed on CNBC. Maya and I were featured in a TechCrunch article about the technical innovation behind our app. And finally, we had those meetings with HR. The numbers were confirmed. Maya and I would each receive just over $7 million once the deal closed. After taxes, it would be around $4 million. Still life-changing money. That night, we opened a bottle of champagne in our small Oakland apartment. To us, Maya said, raising her glass, to building something that matters. And to never having to worry about rent again, I added. We clinked glasses and drank. The champagne was good, better than what we usually bought, but not outrageously expensive. We weren't the splurging types, even with millions on the horizon. So, Maya said, curling up beside me on our worn sofa. Now that it's real, what will you do with your windfall? I'd been thinking about this a lot. First, I want us to buy a house. Nothing ostentatious, but something with space, good light, maybe a view. She nodded. I'd like that. What else? I'm going to set up a scholarship fund at my old university for first-generation college students in computer science, people who don't have family safety nets. Maya smiled. I love that idea. And I want to fund a coding boot camp for underserved communities, like the one you volunteer at, but with more resources. I took another sip of champagne. The rest I'll invest. Keep working. Live comfortably but not extravagantly. No Lamborghini? No private island? She was teasing, but there was warmth in her eyes. Not my style, though I might upgrade my home. Gym equipment. I looked at her. What about you? Still planning to help your parents retire? Absolutely. They've worked so hard for so long. She played with the stem of her glass. I want to fund some climbing programs for kids who wouldn't otherwise have access to the sport. And maybe... I've been thinking about starting a foundation focused on healthcare access in rural communities, places technology alone can't solve. The problem. That's beautiful, I said sincerely. I'd like to help with that if you want. She leaned in to kiss me. I'd like that very much. We spent the evening dreaming, planning, imagining. It felt surreal, but also right. We had earned this, not just financially, but ethically. We had built something valuable, something that helped people. Our plans for the money reflected that same spirit, giving back, creating opportunity, making a difference. The topic of my family didn't come up. Maya knew my position, and she supported it. She had met my parents only once, at a strained dinner when they visited San Francisco shortly after we started dating. She'd been polite, but reserved, picking up on the tension between us. She'd never met James. The next morning, as we were getting ready for work, my phone rang. It was James again. I considered ignoring it, but decided to get it over with. Hello, James. Alex. His voice was tight, controlled. I need to talk to you about Mom and Dad. What about them? They told me you're refusing to help them move. Back to California. Is that true? I sighed. I told them I'd think about it, but yes, I'm leaning towards not helping. I don't even have words for that. They're your parents, Alex. They raised you, put you through college, and then left me to fend for myself when I was at my lowest point. You're still on that? It was a temporary setback. You recovered fine without a handout. It wasn't about the money, James. It was about the support, the caring. They had it to give, financially and emotionally, and they chose not to. There was a pause. So this is revenge? They didn't help you, so you won't help them? No. This is me recognizing an unhealthy dynamic and choosing not to participate in it. They only care about me now because of what I can do for them. That's not a relationship I'm interested in fostering. That's ridiculous. They've always cared about you. Have they? Did they call regularly before Health Quanta hit it big? Did they take an interest in my work, my life? Or was it all about comparing me unfavorably to you and your stable career choices? Another pause. You're being childish, holding on to past grievances instead of being the bigger person. Maybe I don't want to be the bigger person anymore. Maybe I just want to be treated with genuine care and respect, not seen as a walking ATM. Fine. His voice was cold now. I'll help them myself then. Some of us understand family obligation. Family obligation works both ways, James. They weren't there for me? You weren't there for me. Keep telling yourself that's why you're doing this. But we both know it's about the money. You've got yours now, so screw everyone else, right? The accusation stung, especially given how far it was from the truth. I was planning to use much of my money to help others, just not the family members who had abandoned me when I needed them. Believe what you want, James. I've got to go. I hung up, feeling shaky. Maya, who had overheard my side of the conversation, wrapped her arms around me. Your brother has a remarkable talent for turning things around, she observed, making you the villain when they're the ones who only showed interest once you had something they wanted. It's a family tradition, I said bitterly, along with selective memory and emotional manipulation. She tightened her embrace. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Healthy boundaries aren't selfish. I leaned into her strength, her wisdom, her unwavering support. Thank you. For understanding. For being here. Always, she promised. As we headed to work, I tried to put the conversation with James out of my mind. We had more important things to focus on: the final stages of the acquisition, ensuring our team would transition smoothly, planning for the integration of our app with Anthem's systems. But family has a way of creeping into your thoughts, even when you're trying to keep them at bay. Throughout the day, James's words echoed in my mind. Was I being petty? Vindictive? Should I be the bigger person and help my parents despite their past behavior? I mentioned these doubts to Maya over lunch. Here's the thing, she said after listening carefully. Helping them wouldn't actually solve anything. It would just reinforce the dynamic where they only value you for what you can provide materially. Is that the relationship you want going forward? She was right, as usual. If I helped them now, it wouldn't be from a place of genuine connection or mutual respect. It would be capitulating to emotional blackmail, and it would set a precedent for every future interaction. No, I said finally. It's not. Then stand firm. It's not about punishing them. It's about establishing healthy boundaries for your own well-being. The acquisition moved inexorably forward. Legal documents were finalized. Regulatory approvals came through. A closing date was set, 6 weeks away. And then the money would be real. Not theoretical, not on paper, but in our bank accounts. My family's campaign intensified as the date approached. My mother called almost daily with thinly veiled requests disguised as casual conversation. We found the loveliest little house in Monterey, she mentioned during one call. Nothing fancy, but the location is wonderful. Just 2 streets from the ocean. Monterey real estate, even nothing fancy, ran into the millions. She knew that. That sounds nice, Mom. I hope you find something that works for your budget. Her sigh was theatrical. Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? Everything in California is so expensive. If only we had a little help with the down payment. I changed the subject, asking about a cousin's new baby. My father took a different approach. He called me directly, which was unusual. He typically let my mother handle family communications. Son, he began, his voice gruff, but with an unfamiliar note of humility. I know things haven't always been smooth between us, especially when you were going through that rough patch a couple years back. I said nothing, waiting. Looking back, I realize we could have been more supportive, financially and otherwise. This was as close to an apology as my father had ever come, but the timing made me skeptical. I appreciate you saying that, Dad. Your mother and I are proud of what you've accomplished. We always knew you had it, in you. Had they? I remembered their constant concerns about the stability of my career, their thinly veiled suggestions that I should have chosen a more traditional path like James. Thanks. And now you're in a position to do something meaningful with your success, something that would make a real difference to your family. And there it was. The apology was just preamble to another request. Dad, I've made my decision. I'm not helping with the house in Monterey. There was a long silence. I see. His voice had cooled considerably. So you're choosing to hold a grudge rather than help your aging parents? I'm choosing to set boundaries based on past behavior. Past behavior? We raised you, put a roof over your head, food in your mouth, clothes on your back. We paid for your college education. And this is how you repay that? I'm grateful for my upbringing, I said carefully. But that was your obligation as parents who chose to have children. It doesn't entitle you to my earnings as an adult. Obligation? He practically spat the word. Is that how you see what we did for you? As an obligation? Isn't that how you see helping me when I was down and out? As an obligation you could decline because I was an adult? Another silence. You've changed, Alex. Success has hardened you. No, Dad. Hardship hardened me. Success just gave me the freedom to establish healthy boundaries. Well, his voice was tight. I won't bother you again then. After he hung up, I sat for a long time, staring at nothing. I wasn't sure if I felt vindicated or just sad. Probably both. That evening, Maya and I talked about it over dinner. It went about as well as could be expected, I concluded after recounting the conversation. But I don't think I'll be hearing from them again anytime soon. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I'm sorry. Even when it's the right decision, estrangement from family is painful. Is that what this is? Estrangement? She considered this. Maybe not permanently. They might come around, recognize the real issues at play. But for now? Yes, I think it is. I nodded slowly. It feels both terrible and necessary, like lancing a boil. That's a vivid metaphor, she said with a small smile. But accurate. 2 days later, I received an email from James. The subject line was simply, family. Alex, it began. I've spoken with Mom and Dad. They're hurt and bewildered by your refusal to help them, especially given your newfound wealth. They feel you're punishing them for something they don't even understand. Is this really the hill you want to die on? Refusing to help the people who gave you life, who raised you, who supported you for 18 years? What could they possibly have done to deserve such cold treatment? Think carefully about the relationship you're damaging. Family is forever, Alex. Money comes and goes. Don't let temporary wealth destroy something irreplaceable. James. I forwarded the email to Maya with the comment, "The guilt trip continues." She responded minutes later. Notice how he never actually addresses the real issue, the fact that they only became interested in your life when there was money to be gained? She was right. The email, like all my family's communications recently, sidestepped the actual problem. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the conditional nature of their care, the way they'd abandoned me in my time of need, but expected me to rush to their aid now that I was successful. I decided not to respond. Nothing I could say would bridge the fundamental disconnect in how we viewed the situation. They saw an ungrateful son refusing to share his good fortune. I saw parents who'd revealed their true colors when I was vulnerable and were now trying to cash in on my success. The closing date for the acquisition drew nearer. 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 weeks. The atmosphere at Health Quanta was a mix of excitement, nostalgia, and anxiety about the future. Would Anthem really preserve our culture, our mission? Would we still have the autonomy we'd been promised? Only time would tell. My family fell silent after James's email. No more calls, no more texts. I told myself it was a relief, but there was a hollow feeling too. They were still my family, despite everything. Their absence, even their opportunistic presence, left a void. A week before the closing date, Maya and I had dinner with Eliza to celebrate all we'd accomplished. We went to an upscale restaurant in San Francisco, the kind with tasting menus and wine pairings, the kind I wouldn't have been able to afford 2 years earlier when I was counting pennies to make rent. Over dessert, Eliza raised her glass. To the journey. From a tiny startup with big dreams to a unicorn that's actually making a difference in people's lives. We clinked glasses. And to what comes next, she continued. Integration with Anthem will have its challenges, but think of the reach we'll have. Millions more users, resources we could only dream of before. To the next chapter, Maya agreed. As we were leaving the restaurant, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a Connecticut area code. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? Alex? It's Sarah, James's wife. I was so surprised. I stopped walking, causing Maya to look at me quizzically. Sarah and I had always had a cordial but distant relationship, defined primarily by our connection to James rather than any direct bond. Sarah, this is unexpected. I know, and I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this, but I'm worried about James. My guard went up immediately. Was this another angle in the family campaign? What's going on? He's been different since this whole situation with your parents started. Stressed, angry. He's not sleeping well. He's taking on extra shifts at the hospital, supposedly to help your parents with the down payment for that house in California, but I think he's just avoiding being home. I felt a twinge of guilt, quickly followed by irritation. This wasn't my problem. I'm sorry to hear that, but I've made my position clear. I know you have. Her voice was careful, measured, and I want you to know, I think you're right. I nearly dropped the phone. What? I was there, Alex, when you called asking for help 2 years ago. I heard his side of the conversation. I told him then that he should help you. You're his brother, and family is supposed to be there for each other. But he refused. Said it wasn't his responsibility, that mixing family and money was a bad idea. I didn't know what to say. Sarah had been on my side. I appreciate you telling me this. There's more. Your parents called him constantly when you were struggling. Not to express concern for you, but to complain about you. About how you'd chosen an unstable career, how you hadn't listened to their advice, how you were asking for handouts instead of solving your own problems. Each word was like a knife. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was still painful. They've always played you against each other, Sarah continued, praising James to you, then turning around and telling him how innovative and creative you are, creating competition where there should be support. Maya was watching me with concern. I mouthed James's wife to her, and she raised her eyebrows in surprise. Why are you telling me this, Sarah? She sighed. Because I think you deserve to know the truth. And because I'm hoping that maybe, if you understand that James has been manipulated too, you might consider reopening communication with him. Not with your parents. I think you're right to set boundaries there. But with your brother. I was silent, processing this. He's stubborn and prideful, she continued. He'll never make the first move. But I think he misses you in his way. And I know our kids would love to know their uncle better. I hadn't thought much about my niece and nephew. They were still young, 10 and 8 now, and I'd seen them only a handful of times at obligatory family gatherings. The thought that they might want a relationship with me, independent of the drama between the adults, was both surprising and touching. I'll think about it, I said finally. No promises, but I'll consider reaching out once things settle down. The acquisition closes next week, and it's pretty chaotic right now. That's all I'm asking. And Alex? Congratulations on your success. It sounds like you've built something really meaningful. After we hung up, I filled Maya in on the conversation as we walked to our car. That's unexpected, she said when I finished. Do you believe her? I considered this. I think so. It aligns with patterns I've observed my whole life, but never fully articulated. My parents pitting us against each other, praising each to the other but never to our faces. Classic triangulation, Maya nodded. A manipulation tactic. They create artificial competition so neither of you turns to the other for support or validation. You're both left seeking it from them instead. I looked at her with newfound appreciation. How do you know these things? She smiled wryly. Therapy, lots of it. My parents are lovely now, but we had some rough years when I was a teenager. Cultural expectations, generational differences. We worked through it with professional help. The idea of family therapy with my parents seemed laughable. They'd never acknowledge there was a problem, let alone agree to work on it. But maybe with James, maybe there was hope for some kind of reconciliation there. The closing date arrived. We gathered in the Health Quanta office, watching via video, conference as executives from both companies signed the final documents in a lawyer's office across town. And just like that, we were officially part of Anthem. Champagne was opened, speeches were made, tears were shed, some happy, some bittersweet. We were proud of what we'd built, excited about the future, but also aware that something was ending. The scrappy startup phase of Health Quanta was over. The money hit our accounts the next day. My phone buzzed with the bank notification while I was in a meeting with the Anthem integration team. $7,300,000. Just like that. My net worth had increased by a factor of about 200 overnight. It didn't feel real. I excused myself from the meeting and went to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. In the mirror, I looked exactly the same. No aura of wealth, no visible change. Just me, Alex Levine, with a few extra commas in my bank balance. I texted Maya, "It's in." She replied moments later, "Mine too. Dinner tonight to celebrate?" "Absolutely," I texted back. "Someplace with good food, but where I can wear jeans." Deal. That evening, over delicious but unpretentious Italian food, we toasted our new financial reality. "To never worrying about rent again," Maya said, raising her glass of Barolo. "To making a difference with our good fortune," I countered. We clinked glasses and smiled at each other across the table. Despite the enormous change in our financial situation, it felt natural, right? Maybe because we'd both come from modest backgrounds. Maybe because we both valued purpose over luxury. Or maybe just because we had each other to keep grounded. "I've been thinking about what Sarah said," I admitted after our main courses arrived. "About reaching out to James." Maya twirled pasta around her fork. "And? What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking maybe it's worth a try. Not necessarily forgiveness or forgetting, but opening a door, seeing what happens." She nodded. "I think that's healthy. Estrangement from your parents might be necessary right now, but a relationship with your brother could be salvageable. I'll call him tomorrow," I decided. "Offer to have dinner when he's in town for that conference. No money talk, no parent talk. Just brother talk." "Brother talk," she repeated with a small smile. "Is that a technical term?" I laughed. "Yes. Very technical. Subject matter experts only." The next day, I called James from my office. It was early afternoon in San Francisco, so mid-afternoon in Connecticut. He answered on the fourth ring, just when I thought it might go to voicemail. "Alex." His voice was guarded. "This is unexpected." "Hey, James." I took a deep breath. "I understand you're coming to San Francisco next month for a conference. I thought maybe we could have dinner, just the two of us." There was a pause. "Just dinner? No agenda?" "No agenda," I confirmed. "No money talk, no parent talk. Just catching up. Brother to brother." Another pause. "Sarah put you up to this, didn't she?" I considered lying, then decided against it. "She called me, shared some perspectives I hadn't considered. But this is my decision, not her directive." He sighed. "That woman, always trying to fix things." "Is that a bad thing?" "No," he admitted. "It's one of the reasons I married her. Her boundless optimism that people and situations can be improved with enough effort." "So, dinner?" "Yes," he said after a moment. "Dinner would be good. I'll text you the exact dates when I'm in town." "Great. I know a few good places depending on what you're in the mood for." "You choose," he said. "You're the local." We ended the call with awkward but not hostile goodbyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I wasn't ready to reach out to my parents yet. The wounds there were deeper, the manipulation more direct, but one step at a time. Maybe rebuilding a relationship with James could eventually lead to some kind of healthier dynamic with them too, or maybe not. I was prepared for either outcome. In the weeks that followed, Maya and I embarked on the practical aspects of wealth management. We met with financial advisors, tax specialists, estate planners. We set up charitable foundations for the causes we cared about. Her healthcare access initiative, my scholarship and coding bootcamp funds. We looked at houses, eventually finding a beautiful mid-century modern in the Berkeley Hills with stunning views of the bay. Work continued. The integration with Anthem had its challenges, as expected, but also its rewards. Our app reached more users than ever before. We were making a real difference in how people navigated the healthcare system. James texted me his conference dates, and we set up dinner for his second night in town. I chose a steakhouse that was upscale but not pretentious, figuring it was the kind of place he'd appreciate. The evening arrived with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. I hadn't seen James in person for over 2 years, not since a strained Thanksgiving at our parents' place in Arizona before my layoff. Maya offered to join us, but I thought it better to keep this first meeting simple. Just the two of us. I arrived at the restaurant early, securing a quiet booth in the back. James arrived precisely on time, looking much as I remembered. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being respected and obeyed. Being a surgeon suited him. "Alex?" He offered his hand, which I shook. "You look well." "Thanks. So do you." We settled into our seats. "How's the conference going?" "Just started today. Mostly registration and welcome cocktails. The actual sessions begin tomorrow." He glanced around the restaurant. "Nice choice. Sarah and I went to a place like this for our anniversary last year." "How is Sarah and the kids?" I asked. His expression softened at the mention of his family. "They're good. Sophie's excelling in school, particularly math and science. And Nathan's become obsessed with soccer. Sarah's busy as ever with her pediatric practice and various community boards. She seems like a remarkable woman." He looked at me curiously. "She is. I'm lucky." We ordered drinks and studied the menus. The conversation remained safely in small talk territory: the weather, his flight, my new house purchase. It wasn't until our appetizers arrived that I decided to broach slightly deeper waters. Sarah mentioned the kids might like to know their uncle better, I said cautiously. James looked up from his crab cake. "She's right. They ask about you sometimes, especially after your company's acquisition made the news. Sophie says she wants to be a tech wizard like Uncle Alex." I smiled, genuinely touched. "I'd like to know them better, too. Maybe a visit sometime? Or they could come out here? There's plenty of room in the new house." "Maybe." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "That would depend on the state of things between us." "And what state is that, exactly?" He set his fork down. "I don't know, Alex. That's the honest answer. We've never been close as adults. Different coasts, different lives. And now this situation with Mom and Dad has created even more distance." I nodded. "I know, and I don't expect us to resolve all of that over one dinner. But maybe we can start by just seeing each other as people, not as competitors in some game our parents created." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that how you see it?" "Isn't it? Haven't they always compared us, used each as a measuring stick for the other? Your stability versus my risk-taking, your traditional career versus my tech ventures, your family life versus my relationships." He was silent for a moment, considering this. "I never thought of it that way, but you might be right." He took a sip of his whiskey. "They do that. They always have, I suppose." Sarah helped me see it clearly, how they triangulate, create artificial competition. "Sarah," he repeated with a rueful smile. "My wife, the amateur psychologist. She seems to have some insight." "She does." He looked at me directly. "She also told me I was wrong not to help you when you needed it. She said it then, and she's said it many times since." This admission surprised me. "And what do you think? Now, with some distance?" He sighed. I was scared. The economy was uncertain. Sophie's school was expensive. I had just taken on a bigger mortgage. I told myself I was being prudent. But really, I was acting from fear. Fear that there wouldn't be enough. Fear that if I helped you once, you'd keep asking. I wouldn't have, I said quietly. It was a one-time crisis. I know that now. He looked down at his plate. And I'm sorry, Alex. Truly. It was the wrong call. The apology took me aback. I hadn't expected it, hadn't come here seeking it. But it felt genuine, and it eased something tight in my chest. Thank you for saying that. Our main courses arrived, giving us both a moment to regroup. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before James spoke again. So this woman your mother mentioned, Maya? It's serious? I smiled automatically at the thought of her. Very. We're talking about marriage eventually, when the time is right. Tell me about her. So I did. I told him about Maya's brilliance as a developer, her passion for healthcare access, her rock climbing adventures, her volunteer work. I told him how she'd seen me at my lowest after being promoted to lead developer and had still treated me as an equal, a partner. How she'd never once made me feel less than. She sounds remarkable, James said when I finished. I'd like to meet her someday. I'd like that too. I hesitated, then added, she's been my rock through all of this. The success, but also the family drama. She's the one who encouraged me to reach out to you, even though she understands why I've set boundaries with Mom and Dad. He nodded slowly. About that. I still don't fully understand your position with them. I get that they weren't there for you financially when you needed it, but to cut them off completely seems extreme. I considered how to explain it in a way he might understand. It's not about the money, James. Not really. It's about the pattern. When I needed help, emotional support as much as financial, they weren't there. They judged me, blamed me, made me feel like a failure. And now that I'm successful, suddenly they're interested again. But only in what I can do for them. That's not a relationship, it's a transaction. They're getting older, Alex. Maybe they genuinely want to be closer to you. By asking for money for a house in California? That's not seeking closeness. That's seeking financial benefit. He sighed. I see your point. But they're still our parents. And I'll always care about them. But I need to protect myself from their manipulations. Maybe someday we can have a healthier relationship, but it would require them acknowledging the patterns and working to change them. Which they're unlikely to do, he admitted. Exactly. We were quiet for a moment. Then James asked, so what? Happens now? With us? I don't know, I said honestly. But I'd like to try. To build something better than what we had before. Something not defined by competition or our parents' expectations. I'd like that too. He raised his glass. To a new chapter? I clinked my glass against his. To a new chapter. The rest of dinner passed pleasantly. We shared stories from our lives, discovered mutual interests we'd never discussed before, laughed at some of the same jokes. By the time we said goodbye outside the restaurant, something had shifted between us. Not a complete healing, that would take time, but a beginning. I'll bring Sarah and the kids next time, he said as we shook hands. Maybe this summer, we could make a vacation of it. I'd like that. Maya would too. In the Uber home, I texted Maya. Dinner went well. Better than expected. Tell you all about it when I get home. She replied instantly. Can't wait. Proud of you for taking this step. As the car wound its way through the San Francisco streets toward the Bay Bridge, I gazed out at the city lights reflecting on the water. 25 years of silence, ended with a dinner. It seemed almost too simple. But then again, maybe that's all it took sometimes. Just showing up, being willing to listen, to forgive. I thought back to how nervous I'd been earlier that evening, pacing our apartment while Maya helped me choose a tie. "You don't need to impress him," she'd said, straightening my collar. "Just be yourself." "That's what I'm afraid of," I'd replied. "What if being myself is what drove him away in the first place?" Maya had given me that look, the one that said she saw right through me. "Daniel, you were 18 when he left. You were barely yourself yet." Now, crossing the bridge toward Oakland, I wondered if she was right. Had I been holding on to a teenager's perception all these years? The man I'd just had dinner with wasn't the stern, emotionally distant father. I remembered. He was older, softer somehow. There was a gentleness to him I didn't recognize. The driver turned down our street, and I could see our apartment building up ahead, warm light spilling from the windows of our third-floor unit. Home. Maya waiting. The life we'd built together over the past decade. Stable, loving, nothing. Like the fractured home I'd grown up in. "Right here is fine," I told the driver, deciding to walk the last block. I needed the fresh air to clear my head. As I strolled past the neighborhood bookstore, closed now for the night, I remembered the box of books my father had mentioned, still in his garage after all these years. My old fantasy novels, comics, and science textbooks. He'd kept them. All. This time, he'd kept them. "I thought you might want them back someday," he'd said over dessert, his voice casual, as if it wasn't significant that he'd carted those books through 3 different moves. As if it wasn't a revelation that he'd never given up on me completely. Maya was waiting at the door when I arrived, her dark hair piled in a messy bun, wearing her favorite oversized Berkeley sweatshirt. She didn't say anything, just opened her arms, and I stepped into them, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "So," she said finally, leading me to the couch. "Tell me everything." I sank into the cushions, loosening my tie. "He's different. Or maybe I am. I don't know." "Different how?" I tried to find the words to explain the strange feeling I'd had throughout dinner, that I was meeting a new person who somehow wore my father's face. He talked about his mistakes, about leaving. He said he was sorry. Maya sat beside me, tucking her feet under her. "Did you believe him?" "I think I did." I paused, remembering the moment when he'd put down his fork, looked me directly in the eyes, and apologized for walking out. No excuses, no deflections. Just a simple, unadorned acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. "Yeah, I believed him." "And how do you feel about that?" I laughed softly. "Are you my wife or my therapist right now?" She nudged me with her shoulder. "Both. Always both. Now answer the question, Professor Lawson." Professor Lawson. My new title as of last month, when I'd finally been granted tenure in the psychology department at Berkeley. An achievement I hadn't shared with my father until tonight. "I'm proud of you, son," he'd said, raising his wine glass in a toast. "Not surprised, though. You were always the smartest person in any room." The compliment had caught me off guard. Had he always thought that? Or was this part of his reinvention, the father he was trying to be now, rather than the one he had been? I searched for the right words as Maya waited patiently. Relieved, I think. Like I've been carrying this heavy thing for so long, and now I can finally put it down. She nodded, her eyes warm. "That's good. That's healing." "But also confused," I continued. "It's like, if he could change this much, become this person who can admit mistakes and apologize and actually listen, why couldn't he have done that 25 years ago, when it mattered most?" "When you needed a father," Maya said softly. "Yeah." I swallowed hard. "When Mom was falling apart, and Eliza was just a kid, and I was trying to hold everything together." Maya took my hand, her thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. Maybe he wasn't capable of it then. People grow, Dan. They learn. Sometimes the hard way. He asked about Eliza, I said. Wanted to know if she'd consider seeing him too. Maya's eyebrows rose. And what did you tell him? I sighed. The truth. That she's more stubborn than I am. That it might take more than an invitation. To dinner. My sister Eliza, 3 years my junior, had taken our father's departure even harder than I had. While I'd responded by becoming hyper-responsible, the perfect student, the substitute man of the house, Eliza had gone in the opposite direction. Rebellious, angry, she'd barely graduated high school. Our relationship had been strained for years, though things had improved since she got sober 5 years ago. She might surprise you, Maya said. She's come a long way. I know, but this is different. I hesitated. He wants to meet Lucas, too. Maya's expression softened at the mention of our 3-year-old son, asleep now in his bedroom down the hall. What do you think about that? I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I don't know. Part of me wants to keep them separate. Protect Lucas from... I trailed off. From what your father might do? Maya finished gently. From what he might not do, I corrected. From promises he might not keep, from disappearing again. I turned to look at her. Lucas adores his grandma Diane. She's been there for every birthday, every Christmas, every skinned knee. She's earned the right to be his grandmother. My father hasn't. Maya nodded thoughtfully. That's fair, but consider this. Lucas also deserves the chance to know his grandfather, especially if your father is genuinely trying to change. Family is complicated, but it's also precious. I knew she was thinking of her own family situation, her parents who lived in Mumbai, who we saw only once a year at best. The way she treasured those visits, how she made sure Lucas knew his Indian, grandparents despite the distance. I'll think about it, I promised, but one step at a time. We talked a while longer, until the emotional weight of the evening finally caught up with me. As we got ready for bed, I felt the tension I'd been carrying all day begin to dissolve. Maya had been right to encourage this meeting. Whatever came next, at least I'd taken the first step. Oh, I almost forgot, I said, as we were sliding under the covers. He kept all my old books, from high school. Said they're still in boxes, in his garage. Maya propped herself up on one elbow. The fantasy collection? Your signed first edition Earthsea books? I nodded. Apparently, he offered to ship them to me. That's unexpected. That's one word for it. I turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. He said he always knew I'd want them back someday, that he was just keeping them safe. Maya was quiet for a moment. Maybe that was his way of keeping a connection to you. Some tangible proof that you existed, that you were his son. I hadn't considered that interpretation. To me, those books had always represented an abandonment. Possessions left behind because they weren't important enough to take, or because the person they belonged to wasn't important enough to remember. Maybe, I conceded. Or maybe he just forgot they were there until he needed a conversation starter. Maya sighed, snuggling closer to me. Always the skeptic. Get some sleep, Professor. We can analyze your father's psychological motivations tomorrow. I smiled in the darkness, wrapping an arm around her. Sorry, occupational hazard. I love you anyway, she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. Love you too. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, replaying moments from the dinner, searching for hidden meanings, unspoken truths. The psychologist in me couldn't help but analyze every gesture, every inflection. Was his remorse genuine? Had he really changed? Or was this some elaborate performance designed to ease his conscience as he entered his 70s? Around 2 in the morning, I gave up and slipped quietly out of bed. I made my way to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window overlooking the quiet street below. A few houses down, someone had forgotten to turn off their Christmas lights, multicolored bulbs casting a festive glow in the late January night. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text message. At this hour? I picked it up, surprised to see my father's name on the screen. Just wanted to say again how good it was to see you. I know we have a lot more to talk about. I'm here when you're ready. No pressure. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The old me, the me from yesterday morning, would have been suspicious of this midnight outreach. Would have seen it as an intrusion, a presumption of intimacy we hadn't earned yet. But something had shifted during that dinner. Some wall had begun to crumble, revealing glimpses of what might be on the other side. Not a perfect relationship. Certainly, but maybe something worth rebuilding. I typed back, "Good to see you too. Let's talk again soon." Simple, non-committal, but a door left open rather than firmly shut. I returned to bed, and this time, sleep came more easily. The next morning was Saturday, my day with Lucas while Maya taught her weekend yoga class. I was making pancakes when my son padded into the kitchen, his dark hair sticking up in all directions, clutching the stuffed elephant he'd slept with since infancy. "Morning, buddy," I said, flipping a pancake that was meant to resemble Mickey Mouse, but looked more like an amoeba. "Hungry?" He nodded sleepily, climbing onto his booster seat at the kitchen table. "Can I have syrup?" "A little bit," I agreed, setting a plate in front of him. "Don't tell Mom." He giggled, a sound that never failed to warm me from the inside out. "It's our secret." As I watched him eat, carefully cutting his pancake into tiny pieces the way he liked, I found myself studying his features. Maya's eyes, definitely. My chin, maybe. But there was something in the shape of his face, the set of his shoulders, that reminded me suddenly, forcefully, of my father. Genetics was a strange thing. This little person, so uniquely himself, was also a repository of family traits stretching back generations, including those from a grandfather he'd never met. "Daddy, can we go to the park today?" Lucas asked, syrup already smeared across his cheek. "Absolutely," I said, reaching over to wipe his face with a napkin. "Which one? Adventure playground or the one with the duck pond?" "Duck pond," he declared. "I want to name all the ducks." I smiled. "Ambitious. There are a lot of ducks." "I know," he said seriously, "but I'm very good at names." An hour later, we were at the park, Lucas running ahead of me toward the pond, already calling out potential duck names. "That one is Captain Quackers, and the brown one is Chocolate Chip." I followed more slowly, coffee in hand, enjoying the crisp January morning. The park was busy with weekend visitors, families like ours, elderly couples on benches, teenagers playing frisbee on the lawn. Lucas had reached the edge of the pond and was crouching down, speaking earnestly to a mallard that seemed remarkably tolerant of his attention. I was about to join him when my phone rang. Eliza. My sister rarely called, preferring to communicate through sporadic texts and occasional memes. We'd been working on our relationship, but it remained a delicate thing, prone to misunderstandings, and old hurts resurfacing. "Hey, Liz," I answered, keeping one eye on Lucas. "Everything okay? Did you have dinner with Dad last night?" Her voice was tight, controlled. I sighed. News traveled fast. "I did. I was going to call you about it today. Mom told me. She's upset." Of course she was. My mother, despite being remarried for 15 years to a kind, stable man who adored her, had never fully recovered from my father's abandonment. In her mind, any contact with him was a betrayal of her pain. "I'm sorry she's upset," I said carefully. But this was something I needed to do for myself. Eliza was quiet for a moment, the only sound her breathing. What was it like? She finally asked, her voice smaller now. Weird, I admitted, but not terrible. He's different. Different how? Older, more reflective. He apologized, Liz. Actually apologized. Another long pause. And you believed him? The same question Maya had asked. I think I did, yes. Lucas had moved on to another group of ducks, this batch apparently deserving superhero names. That one is Super Quack, and that's Wonder Duck. Is that Lucas? Eliza asked, her tone softening at the sound of her nephew's voice. Yeah, we're at the park. Duck naming expedition. She laughed, a brief, genuine sound that reminded me of when we were kids, before everything fell apart. He's got his priorities straight. He wants to meet you, I said after a moment. Dad, I mean, if you're open to it. The line went quiet again, so long that I checked to make sure we hadn't been disconnected. I don't know if I can do that, she finally said. It's not as simple for me as it is for you. I bristled at that. It's not simple for me either, Liz. Nothing about this is simple. You know what I mean, she insisted. You've always been the golden child, the one who did everything right. I was the screw-up. That's not fair, I protested, though there was some truth to it. I had been the easy child, the one who channeled my grief into achievement rather than rebellion. And it's not true anymore. Look at everything you've accomplished. Your business is thriving. You've been sober for 5 years. I know, she said. But seeing him, it brings everything back. All the old feelings. I understood that better than she knew. I felt the same way before last night. But Liz, maybe it's time to put it down. All that anger, that resentment, it's so heavy. Says the psychology professor, she retorted, but there was a hint of humor in her voice. Occupational hazard, I replied, echoing what I'd told Maya the night before. Lucas had circled back to me, tugging on my sleeve. Daddy, there's a baby duck. Come see. Be right there, buddy, I promised, then back to Eliza. Just think about it, okay? No pressure. But if you change your mind, I'll let you know, she said. Give Lucas a hug from his favorite aunt. His only aunt, I reminded her. Semantics. Talk soon, big brother. After we hung up, I crouched beside Lucas to admire the duckling he'd found, letting him explain in great detail why this particular duck should be named Lightning McQuack. As he chattered away, I wondered what my father would make of this. Bright, curious grandchild. Would he see himself reflected there? Would he regret the years he'd missed? More importantly, would he stick around long enough to truly know Lucas? Or would he disappear again once the novelty wore off? That was the fear that kept nagging at me, beneath all the tentative hope. People rarely changed fundamentally, especially at his age. What guarantee did I have that this reconciliation attempt wasn't just another way for him to ease his conscience without doing the real work of being present? None, I realized. I had no guarantees. Just like I had no guarantees that stepping back into a relationship with him wouldn't reopen old wounds or create new ones. All I had was this moment, my son naming ducks, the winter sun warm on our faces, and a choice about what kind of future I wanted to build from the complicated materials of my past. When we got home, Maya was already back from her class, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by student papers. She looked up with a smile as we entered. "How are the ducks?" she asked, accepting the exuberant hug Lucas launched at her. "We named them all," Lucas announced proudly. "Even the baby ones." "Impressive," Maya said, kissing the top of his head. "Why don't you go wash your hands and I'll fix you a snack?" Once Lucas had scampered off to the bathroom, Maya looked at me questioningly. "You okay? You seem distracted?" I sat down on the couch. "Eliza called. She found out about dinner last night." Ah. Maya gathered her papers into a neat stack. And how did that go? About as well as you'd expect. She's not ready to see him yet? Maya nodded thoughtfully. That's her right. Everyone heals at their own pace. I know, but I worry about her holding on to that anger forever. It's not good for her. Maybe, Maya agreed. But forcing a reconciliation before she's ready wouldn't be good for her either. She was right, as usual. One of the many reasons I'd fallen in love with her was her ability to see multiple sides of a situation, to hold complex truths without rushing to judgment. It made her an excellent literature professor and an even better partner. There's something else, I admitted. My father texted me last night. He wants to meet again. Talk more. Maya's expression remained neutral, but I could see the concern in her eyes. And what do you want? I think I want to try, I said slowly. But I'm scared, Maya. Scared that I'm being naive, that I'm setting myself up to be hurt again. She moved to sit beside me on the couch, taking my hand in hers. That's a valid fear. But Daniel, consider this. You're not 18 anymore. You're not dependent on him for your emotional or financial well-being. You're a grown man with a family of your own, a career you love. If this doesn't work out, it will be sad, but it won't devastate you. You have so much more now than you did then. Her words resonated deeply. She was right. The stakes were different now. I was different. Besides, she continued with a small smile, I'll be here to pick up the pieces if necessary, though I don't think it will be. Lucas returned, hands dripping despite his claim to have washed them. As Maya led him back to the bathroom for a more thorough cleaning, I pulled out my phone and responded to my father's text from the night before. Coffee next weekend? There's a place near us called Timeless Grounds. Good pastries. His response came almost immediately. I'll be there. Thank you, Daniel. Simple words, but they carried the weight of decades of silence, of regret, of possibility. The week that followed was unusually busy. The spring semester was in full swing, and I had papers to grade, lectures to prepare, and department meetings to attend. My research assistant had found a significant error in our data analysis that required hours of recalculation. By Friday, I was exhausted and questioning the wisdom of scheduling yet another emotionally complicated meeting with my father. You can reschedule if you need to, Maya suggested as we got ready for bed Friday night. He'd understand. I shook my head. Better to keep the momentum going. Besides, it's just coffee. An hour, tops. She studied me as she braided her hair for sleep. You're nervous again. Not nervous, I corrected. Just preparing myself mentally. She smiled knowingly. That's what I said. Nervous. I threw a pillow at her, which she caught easily. Fine. Yes, I'm nervous. Happy? Ecstatic, she said, tossing the pillow back. But you know what? I think it's a good sign. It means this matters to you. That despite everything, you still care about your relationship with your father. I hadn't considered that interpretation. Or it means I'm still carrying the scars of being abandoned and have deep-seated trust issues. Maya rolled her eyes. Always the dramatic psychologist. Can't it be both? I laughed, feeling some of the tension leave my body. I suppose it can. The next morning, I arrived at Timeless Grounds 15 minutes early, claiming a table by the window. The cafe was busy with Saturday morning customers, students with laptops, young families, elderly couples reading newspapers. Normal people doing normal things, while I sat waiting for a reunion that still felt surreal. I ordered a black coffee and a croissant I wasn't sure I could eat, given the knot in my stomach. As I waited, I found myself rehearsing what I wanted to say. There were questions I needed answered, explanations I deserved. But I also didn't want to turn our second meeting into an interrogation. At exactly 10 o'clock, My father walked through the door. He spotted me immediately and waved, then got in line to order. I watched him interact with the barista, smiling, chatting briefly. He seemed at ease in a way I didn't remember from my childhood. Back then, he'd always appeared slightly uncomfortable in social situations, as if perpetually afraid of saying the wrong thing. "Sorry to keep you waiting," he said as he sat down across from me, setting his cappuccino on the table. "Traffic was lighter than I expected." "No problem. I got here early." An awkward silence fell between us. The easy conversation of our dinner seemed harder to recapture in the bright light of day without the social lubrication of a restaurant setting. "How's your week been?" he finally asked. "Busy. End of January is always hectic at the university." He nodded. "I imagine so. Your mother was always swamped this time of year, too." The mention of my mother hung in the air. He seemed to realize his mistake immediately, a flash of uncertainty crossing his face. "I spoke with Eliza," I said, deciding to dive right in. "She knows we met." He straightened slightly. "And how did she take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. She's not ready to see you yet." He nodded slowly. "I understand. I hurt her deeply. Both of you. Why did you leave?" The question came out before I could stop it. Blunt, direct. The thing I'd wanted to ask for 25 years. My father set down his cup, his expression solemn. "That's a fair question. One you deserve an answer to." He took a deep breath. "The simple answer is that I was a coward. I was unhappy in my marriage, felt trapped in a life I hadn't really chosen, and instead of facing those problems like a man, I ran away from them." I remained silent, waiting for more. "The more complicated answer," he continued, "involves depression I didn't recognize or treat, a midlife crisis I handled spectacularly badly, and frankly, terrible examples of manhood from my own father and grandfather. Because I'm 71 years old, Daniel. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but leaving you and your sister is by far the worst. I don't want to die without at least trying to make amends. Without you knowing that not a day has gone by, that I haven't thought of you, missed you, regretted my choices." His voice broke on the last words, and to my shock, tears welled in his eyes. In all my childhood memories, I had never seen my father cry. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, quickly wiping his eyes. "I haven't earned it, but I hoped maybe we could get to know each other again, as the people we are now." I sat back, momentarily overwhelmed by his emotion, by the raw honesty of his words. The psychologist in me recognized the signs of genuine remorse, of the hard internal work that must have preceded this moment. "I have a son," I said finally. "Lucas. He's 3. My father's expression softened. "I know. Sarah found your Facebook page years ago. We've kept tabs on you in a non-stalker way, seen photos when you or Maya posted them publicly." This revelation was unsettling. While there was something touching about the idea that he'd cared enough to look, it also felt like a violation. Him witnessing moments of my life without my knowledge or consent. "I'd like to meet him someday," my father continued. "When you're ready. If you're ever ready." I thought of Lucas at the duck pond, naming each bird with absolute conviction. His trusting nature, his easy affection for everyone he met. The way he saw the world as fundamentally good and safe. "Maybe," I said cautiously. "But I need time, and I need to know that you're serious about being in our lives consistently. Lucas doesn't need a grandfather who shows up for one exciting weekend and then disappears." "I understand," he said solemnly. "I wouldn't want that either. I know I need to earn your trust back. I'm prepared to do whatever that takes, for as long as it takes." We talked for another hour, moving beyond the heaviest topics to safer ground. He told me about his life in Portland, his work as a marketing consultant, now semi-retired. I shared more about my research, my teaching, the book I was slowly writing on resilience in childhood trauma survivors. Somewhat autobiographical? He asked with a sad smile. More than somewhat, I admitted, though I try to maintain scholarly objectivity. By the time we said goodbye, the morning crowd at Timeless Grounds had thinned, replaced by the lunchtime rush. We stood awkwardly on the sidewalk outside, neither quite sure how to end the meeting. "This was good," my father said, finally. "Thank you for agreeing to see me again." I nodded. "It was, and I'm glad you reached out." He seemed to debate with himself for a moment, then asked, "Would it be all right if I called you sometimes? Just to chat, check in? Or texts, if that's easier?" The old Daniel would have panicked at this suggestion, seen it as too much, too soon. But something had shifted during our conversation. Not a complete healing, but another step in that direction. "Text would be good," I said. "We can start there." His smile was like watching the sun break through clouds. "I'd like that very much." On an impulse that surprised me, I extended my hand. He took it, and then, in a movement that seemed to surprise us both, pulled me into a brief, tentative hug. For a moment, I was transported back to childhood. The familiar scent of his aftershave, the solid feel of his shoulders. Then he stepped back, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Take care, Daniel," he said softly. "Give my best to Maya." "I will," I promised. "Take care." As I walked to where I'd parked my car, I felt oddly lighter. Not completely unburdened. There were still so many complicated emotions to work through, so many years to account for. But somewhere in that cafe, amid the honesty and regret and cautious hope, I'd put down some of the weight I'd been carrying since I was 18 years old. When I got home, Maya was in the backyard with Lucas, helping him plant seedlings in the small vegetable garden they'd started together. I stood at the kitchen window watching them for a moment, my wife patiently showing our son how to pat the soil gently around a tiny tomato plant, both of them with dirt smudged on their cheeks. My family. The one I'd chosen, built with intention and love. So different from the fractured home of my childhood. Maya looked up and saw me, her face breaking into a smile. She whispered something to Lucas, who turned and spotted me too, his whole body lighting up. "Daddy, come see what we planted." I stepped outside into the crisp winter sunshine, kneeling beside them in the soft earth. "Show me everything, buddy." As Lucas excitedly pointed out each seedling, giving them names, just as he had the ducks, Maya caught my eye with a questioning look. I gave her a small nod. Yes, the meeting had gone well. We would talk about it later, after Lucas was in bed. For now, I just wanted to be here, fully present with the family we'd created. The soil under my fingernails, my son's excited chatter, my wife's knowing smile. These were the anchors that kept me steady, no matter what storms the past might still hold. Later that evening, after dinner and bath time and 3 bedtime stories, Lucas was a skilled negotiator. Maya and I sat on the couch with glasses of wine. I told her everything, my father's explanations, his remorse, the revelations about his attempts to contact us years ago. "Do you believe him?" she asked when I'd finished. "About trying to reach out before?" I considered this. I think I do. It matches some hazy memories I have, and it would explain why Mom was so adamant about us having nothing to do with him. "How do you feel about that? About her keeping you apart?" I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. Conflicted. I understand why she did it. He hurt her terribly, and she was trying to protect us. But also, I wonder what might have been different if we'd had some relationship with him during those years. If Eliza and I might have been spared some of the abandonment issues we've both struggled with. Maya nodded thoughtfully. It's impossible to know, and not particularly useful to dwell on, perhaps. The psychologist's wife, always so wise, IT later that evening, After dinner and bath time and 3 bedtime stories, Lucas was a skilled negotiator. Maya and I sat on the couch with glasses of wine. I told her everything. My father's explanations, his remorse, the revelations about his attempts to contact us years ago. "Do you believe him?" she asked when I'd finished. "About trying to reach out before?" I considered this. I think I do. It matches some hazy memories I have, and it would explain why Mom was so adamant about us having nothing to do with him. "How do you feel about that? About her keeping you apart?" I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. Conflicted. I understand why she did it. He hurt her, terribly, and she was trying to protect us. But also, I wonder what might have been different if we'd had some relationship with him during those years. If Eliza and I might have been spared some of the abandonment issues we've both struggled with. Maya nodded thoughtfully. It's impossible to know, and not particularly useful to dwell on, perhaps. The psychologist's wife, always so wise, I teased. She smiled, tucking her feet under her. I had a good teacher, so what happens next? We text, apparently. Take it slow. I hesitated. I told him meeting Lucas wasn't on the table yet, that I needed to be sure he was serious about being in our lives consistently. That's fair, Maya agreed. What did he say to that? That he understood. That he's prepared to do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, to earn back my trust. I leaned back against the cushions. It was not what I expected him to say. People can surprise us, Maya said softly. Even the ones who've hurt us the most. I thought about that as we finished our wine, as we rinsed our glasses and turned off the lights and checked on our sleeping son. People could surprise you. They could change, learn from their mistakes, become better versions of themselves, or at least they could try. The question was whether I could change too, whether I could let go of enough of the past to make room for something new, something that would never replace what we'd lost, but might still be valuable in its own right. As I drifted off to sleep, that night I found myself remembering a moment from my childhood, fishing with my father at a lake in the Sierras, the summer I turned 10. He'd taught me to cast, his hands guiding mine on the rod, his voice patient as I struggled to get the technique right. When I finally managed a decent cast, the pride in his eyes had warmed me more than the summer sun. "That's it, Danny," he'd said. "You've got it now." Had I imagined that memory over the years, gilded it with the longing of an abandoned child? Or was it real? Proof that there had been good moments worth salvaging from the wreckage of our relationship. Perhaps it didn't matter. What mattered was what we built now, today, with the imperfect materials at hand. Sunday morning brought a text from my father. "Thank you for yesterday. It meant more than I can say." Simple, genuine, not asking for a response, just expressing gratitude. I showed it to Maya as we made pancakes with Lucas. She read it and handed the phone back with an encouraging smile. "Are you going to reply?" she asked. I slid the phone into my pocket. "Later. Right now, someone needs help with chocolate chip placement." Lucas grinned up at me, a wooden spoon in each hand. "I'm making smiley faces, Daddy." "I see that, buddy. Very artistic." The day unfolded in the pleasant rhythm of family, life, pancakes, a trip to the Children's Museum, an impromptu play date with Lucas's friend from preschool. It wasn't until evening, after Lucas was in bed, that I remembered the unanswered text. I pulled out my phone and typed, "It was good. Still processing everything, but glad we talked." His response came quickly. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Words that should have been comforting, but that triggered a reflexive skepticism. He'd said similar things before, hadn't he? Before he walked out and never came. House I showed the exchange to Maya, who was grading papers at the dining table. "You don't believe him," she observed. "I want to," I admitted. "But there's this voice in my head that keeps saying, He left once, he'll leave again. Don't get attached. Maya set down her pen. That's self-protection talking, and it makes perfect sense. But Dan, consider this. Even if the worst happens, even if he does disappear again, would you regret trying? Wouldn't you rather know you gave it a chance than wonder for the rest of your life what might have been? I thought about that for a long moment. When did you get so smart about family dynamics, Professor Lawson? She smiled wryly. I've had some practice being married to a trauma psychologist. Also, I had the childhood you deserved. Imperfect parents who nevertheless stuck around and did their best. Huh? I kissed the top of her head. Lucky you. Lucky us, she corrected, because now we get to create that for Lucas. The following week passed in a blur of academic responsibilities. My father and I exchanged occasional texts. Nothing profound, just brief check-ins about our days. He shared a photo of a hawk he'd spotted while hiking. I sent him a link to an article about resilience research that had quoted my work. Small steps, building bridges across the chasm of years. On Thursday, I received an unexpected call from my mother. She and her husband, Gary, lived in Sacramento, close enough for regular visits, but far enough to maintain healthy boundaries. We typically spoke once a week, usually on Sundays, so a midweek call was unusual. Is everything okay, Mom? I asked, stepping out of my office to take the call. That depends, she said, her voice tight. Is it true you've been seeing your father? So much for breaking the news gently. I've met with him twice, yes. Who told you? Eliza? It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that you didn't tell me yourself. The hurt in her voice was palpable, even through the phone. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. I was going to tell you, Mom. I just wanted to figure out how I felt about it first. And how do you feel about it? About him suddenly reappearing? After all these years, thinking he can just waltz back into your life like nothing happened? The bitterness in her tone was familiar, a constant undercurrent in our family life even years after the divorce. My father had become a villain in her narrative, and by extension, in ours. It had been easier as children to accept that version than to grapple with the more complex truth. It's not like that, I said carefully. He's not pretending nothing happened. He's apologized, explained some things. She scoffed. Oh, I'm sure he has a whole sob story prepared. Poor misunderstood Richard, who just needed to find himself at the expense of his family. Mom, I said firmly, I understand you're upset. You have every right to be. But I'm 43 years old. I need to make my own decisions about this. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller, vulnerable. I'm just worried he'll hurt you again, Danny. You and Eliza. You don't remember how bad it was, how broken you both were when he left. But I did remember. The hollow feeling in my chest that never quite went away. The way Eliza would sit by the window for hours, waiting for a car that never came. The sound of my mother crying behind her bedroom door when she thought we couldn't hear. I remember, Mom, I said gently. And I'm being careful, but I need to do this. For myself, and maybe someday for Lucas too. Lucas? She repeated sharply. You're letting him near my grandson? Not yet, I assured her. That's a long way off, if it happens at all. But Mom, Lucas deserves to know his grandfather if that's possible. Just like he deserves to know you and Gary. She sighed heavily. I don't like this, Daniel. I really don't. I know, but I need you to respect my decision. Can you do that? Another long silence. I suppose I'll have to. You're a grown man, as you pointed out. Thank you, I said, relieved she wasn't going to make this more difficult than it already was. We're still on for Sunday dinner, right? Of course, she replied, though her tone remained strained. Gary's making his lasagna. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the stack of papers waiting to be graded. I'd known my mother would be upset, but I hadn't anticipated the intensity of her reaction. In her mind, any contact with my father was a betrayal of her pain, of our family's narrative of abandonment and survival. But I couldn't live my life according to her wounds, no matter how legitimate they were. At some point, I had to chart my own course, make peace on my own terms. I texted Eliza. "So Mom knows." Her response was immediate. "Sorry." She kept asking questions. You know how she gets. "It's okay. Had to happen eventually." How'd she take it? "About as well as you'd expect. Concerned he'll hurt us again." Upset I didn't tell her myself. There was a pause before Eliza's next text. "I've been thinking, maybe I could meet him too. Not alone. With you there." I stared at the message, surprised. Just last week, she'd been adamant that she wasn't ready. "What changed your mind?" I typed. "Been talking to my sponsor. She thinks holding on to resentment isn't good for my sobriety. That I should at least hear him out." I felt a surge of admiration for my sister. For all her struggles, her commitment to her recovery was unwavering. In some ways, she'd done more emotional work in the past 5 years than I had in a lifetime of academic psychology. "Just say when," I replied. "I'll be there." That weekend, dinner at my mother's was predictably tense. She was civil but cool, her disappointment evident in every carefully measured response, every averted gaze. Gary, bless him, tried to keep the conversation flowing, asking about Lucas's preschool, Maya's latest research paper, anything to fill the awkward silences. On the drive home, Maya reached over and squeezed my hand. "Give her time. This is stirring. Up a lot for her." "I know," I sighed. "I just wish she could separate her feelings about him from her feelings about me seeing him." "That's asking a lot," Maya said gently. "He was the love of her life, the father of her children. The person who promised to stay and then didn't. Those wounds run deep." I nodded, watching the headlights illuminate the highway ahead. "Do you think I'm making a mistake? Being naive?" Maya considered this for a moment. "I think you're taking a risk, a calculated one, with your eyes open. That's not naive. That's brave." I turned to look at her profile in the dim light of the car. "How did I get so lucky finding you?" She smiled without taking her eyes off the road. "Just fortunate timing. I was on the rebound. You were the first decent guy in my intro to cognitive psychology class." "Harsh but fair," I laughed, feeling some of the tension of the evening dissolve. The next 2 weeks brought a steady stream of texts with my father, each one a small deposit in the bank of rebuilding trust. He was careful not to push, to let me set the pace. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, my interests. Shared memories I'd forgotten, the time we built a trebuchet in the backyard for my science project, the camping trip where we got caught in a thunderstorm and had to take shelter in a cave. I found myself looking forward to his messages, to the glimpses they provided of a man I was only beginning to know. The father I remembered had been serious, often remote. This version, or perhaps just this side of him I'd never fully seen, was thoughtful, self-deprecating, interested in the world in a way that reminded me, uncomfortably at times, of myself. In early February, Eliza finally agreed to meet him.